Toddcast.
Oh, hi, Sally. How are you?
Episode 3, we're going to do Twisted Towns this week, Todd.
Which is kind of cool because it's an idea that we had for a podcast that never really came off the ground. But the idea for it actually came because I was on my way to an investigation to actually do some paranormal investigating. And we were driving through some small towns. And I said, all these small towns have their welcome to, Happyville or whatever it is. And they've got that nice sign when you drive through. And it was summertime. And it's like, the weekend of August 17th is the get together of the Church of the blah, blah, blah. And the, polka show and all that kind of stuff. And then as I'm driving through, I'm like, you just know these towns have all this stuff that happened that people may talk about or people may remember or, people in whispered voices, talk about, but all this stuff that the Chamber of Commerce doesn't necessarily put on that sign when you drive through town. It's not out there,
Like Villisca, Iowa. Actually, Villisca, Iowa is the one place where I'm sure that they put it. The Chamber of Commerce talks about it because it's a huge tourist attraction these days. And
the Villisca Axe Murder House for people that don't know what we're talking about.
Which is on my bucket list, actually. I'm no pun intended, I'm dying to go there. But I know. I had to throw that in. But Twisted Towns, I mean, we all know small town America is this idyllic, beautiful little oasis of small main streets and happiness, and let's have the strawberry festival, and it's not always that way. So it's kind of interesting.
It's funny because Sherlock Holmes, in some of his stories, he always said, like, give me London over like the quaint hills of the countryside, because that's where evil really lies. So people think that the big cities are where all this nasty stuff happens, and it does, but all these small towns have a back history. There's stuff going on there all the time.
Lots of shady stuff going on all the time. So we're going to kick off our Twisted Town series this week. But first, we want to give everybody an update on our ongoing case. In last week's episode, I sort of billed it as we got our own case. And I was like so excited to get this case. It's still going on. It hasn't stopped.
Well, and here's the thing. And I think that whenever you go in to investigate, or in our case, I look at it as an opportunity to help someone get through whatever they're getting through. When you enter into that situation, the truth of the matter is that you'll never have 100% of the answers.
Right.
And a prime example of that is something that we talked about in the first couple of weeks, and that's the Amityville story. Like, that happened over 40 years ago, and they're still not, the answers are still not there. Everything's still up in the air about that. And I think when you do investigations, or when you try to help, there's so many layers. It's like layers of onion. How do you get to the bottom of it? And I think that you kind of get some answers, and then you kind of get some ways to work around some stuff. And I think that's where we're at with helping a friend of ours out. So it's kind of weird.
I don't think that there's ever a case where it's just cut and dry.
Right.
I think there's always something. There's always, like you said, there's always another layer to it somewhere. It's a puzzle that you have to solve in a lot of cases. It would be nice sometimes to go into a place and just say, okay, boom, 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 here's what you've got. You're fine. See you later. But that's not always how it works.
Yeah. And in this case, what we're finding out is some of our initial thoughts, while they weren't necessarily wrong, I think it's only part of the story. And the last thing I want to do is necessarily come on the podcast and talk about specifics about anything that we're involved with. But in this case, we went to this person's living space, an apartment, and had some stuff happen and got some audio and had some K2 hits and all that kind of stuff. But what's truly going on there, I think, is a mixture of a lot of things. And I think that the person that we're trying to help out really may be at the center of where everything starts, because of their ability to be open and deal with stuff and have energies come to them and all that kind of stuff. So it's we're planning another quick visit back, and also planning on giving this individual some tools to help try to work through all this.
It
So
just kind of, at the farther into it we get, the more of a read I start to get on things. And we were just discussing last night, I sort of had an epiphany, I guess you could say. And I thought to myself, this is the angle that I think may be going on. Because as I said, when I try to, and I always say for lack of a better term, because I'm not really sure what you call it, but when I try to tap into this person's energy, it's very fuzzy. And there's about 6 or 7 different emotions that I'm feeling from this one person. And not that that's not okay or doesn't happen to people, but in this situation, it's kind of putting me on guard as to maybe this is going on or this could be going on. It's sort of, it's something is still not sitting right. We don't feel like we have everything that we need right now.
Right. And it also reminds me again of the Amityville story, in that all these years later, you start to hear other things that were going on. And you and I both just recently got Discovery Plus, so that we could watch all of our ghost shows and paranormal shows and stuff like that.
Yay.
And they have a great documentary on there about the Amityville story, which I watched. I know you watched, and it was very enlightening. And I also saw that they have something on the Warrens that I want to watch too. So did you see that?
Yeah, no, I didn't see that. So you're gonna have to. We're like little kids. We're like, you go. We got Discovery Plus so we can watch our ghosty shows.
It's the same group that did the other documentary, but it's on the Warrens themselves. So it talks about a lot of their major investigations, including Amityville, including the stuff that kind of kicked off The Conjuring and all that kind of stuff. So I'm looking forward to that.
Me too. Then you'll have to let me know what the name of that is, because I haven't seen
called
that
The Warrens
yet.
or something. I mean, if you look,
Just
you'll find it.
All right, thanks for that.
In Love.
Thanks, Sherlock. Lorraine in Love. You know, they've gotten some mixed reviews over the years that they've been doing what they do, and I really believe that there is something there. I mean, if you have the ability to not only help people but to make a living out of it, why wouldn't you take advantage of that?
Well, and here's the thing. I mean, when they did the Amityville investigation, the only thing they asked for was gas money.
Right.
And for their tolls on the freeways to be paid. That's it.
Right.
They didn't ask for, so here. And the other thing is, I don't care if you're Ed and Lorraine Warren, if you're Zach Bagans, if you're the guys from what's now Ghost Nation or Taps or whoever you are. People will always question how sincere you are, your knowledge, and even people within the paranormal group, society. Like, everybody questions everybody.
Yeah.
And I think at some point you got to get past that, and you have to be open to whether or not it's your way of investigating or whether or not it's the way you believe. You still have to be open to other ideas. It's, so.
Everybody's different. Everybody approaches things different. You could apply it to pretty much anything in life. And, we all handle things, we all approach things differently. Our style is developing into something that may be very different from a Ghost Adventures style, which, it's entertainment. But our style is different.
I had an epiphany last night, and I don't know that I'm necessarily proud of this epiphany. Okay. There is a show called Kindred Spirits, and it's Amy Bruni and Adam somebody or another.
Barry.
What? I'm sorry, what?
Barry. Adam Barry.
Adam Barry, that's right.
Yes.
They kind of have a style that we've kind of adopted a little bit. And like I said, I'm not necessarily sure how I feel about that, because originally my personal thoughts were, well, I would never investigate like that. That's not my way of investigating. Then all of a sudden you realize, maybe some of the stuff they do, some of the stuff they try is actually kind of cool and inventive. And an episode that we just watched this week actually helped us out with our investigation a little bit. So maybe there's a little bit of them in us.
And well, it's funny because there's nothing wrong with a hybrid. There's nothing wrong with using your
just do what you
instruments, using your emotions and using your feelings at the time. And this is funny. I have to tell everybody about this. Last week, we were watching Kindred Spirits and we got so excited. We decided to try our own experiment at home based on what we saw on the show. And we still have to do it, but we got it set up, which was really cool. And it's using the spirit box, you being there in Wisconsin, me being here in New York, and using the spirit box to communicate without either one of us hearing the other one, and then comparing notes, so to speak, to see if we got any intelligence.
I can't wait to try that. Last week was
so
not
excited.
When we helped out this individual that we're working with now, it wasn't the time to do it. It was a little rushed. It was a little frantic. But at some point, I want to try that out.
I know. We're just like kids. But it's important, though. I believe it's important. It's a great way to sort of do an exercise in working together even more in a totally different way, because we can't be right next to each other all the time. We're not next to each other. Oh, yeah. Well, you know what?
Thank God.
Whatever. You can't get rid of me. It's not that easy. What? But, we can't be next to each other physically all the time. So this is a great way to check it out and see if we can do something that we can work together without being in the same physical space. So I think that's pretty cool. So it'll be neat. So ongoing with our case, still trying to figure things out, but making headway, just a few twists and turns along the way.
Yeah, we'll get there. I mean, it's going to take some time. And I think the big thing here is we're not going to get all the answers. We just need to arm this individual with the ability to make changes in their life that will benefit them. And it's going to be up to that person to do the work.
Yes.
It's going to be up to that person to do the work. Because something I wanted to ask you this, because as long as we're kind of talking about shows and stuff, I like Dead Files. I've always liked Dead Files with Steve and Amy. And
Steve DeShavi.
Yep. And Amy something. I can't. What is it?
You're the one who always says her name. You can't remember her name. You're like Amy Allen.
Amy Allen. That's right. Allen. So I like their show a lot. And one thing that I've noticed is like early in the series, and they've been on several seasons, but early in the series, they'd say, well, what do we have to do? And she would say, well, you have to find a shaman. You got to bring him in, or you got to find a magical specter wingling or whatever there was that they had to bring in.
She came up with some interesting ones.
A chaos magician. I like that.
I like that
magician.
One. Yeah.
But now it sounds like they actually help. They bring the actual group in to do the work, which I think is even better, because if you're average Joe Blow, or even if you're involved in this at all and into it, and maybe you do some investigating or whatever, maybe you got some medium powers, where do you find a chaos magician on Craigslist?
They're not in the yellow pages, under chaos magician.
I'm going to look up chaos magician right now online and just see if I come up with something while you're talking.
I always used to laugh at those, because I'd say, how are these normal everyday people who are just afraid because there's weird things going on in their house in middle America, how are they supposed to find a chaos magician or, an Indian shaman, in Miami, Florida? It's just not always going to happen.
Okay. And I don't want to get into politics, but two quick things. Number one, I found a guy, I believe his name is Sebastian. He calls himself Father Sebastian. He's a chaos magician. And then somebody did a blog explaining why the Donald, or also known as President Trump, is the ultimate chaos magician. Right? I mean, think about that. Maybe he is.
True. It's true.
He's in the White House going, and stuff like that. And then,
at this point, it wouldn't surprise me, because anything's possible at this point in time.
True.
We thought we were getting rid of 2020. 2020 just reared its ugly head and kicked up about 10 notches. And it's been very interesting, to say the least. But yeah, I like the direction that Dead Files is going in, especially the new episodes on Discovery Plus. Not to keep plugging Discovery Plus, but it definitely is worth the $4.99 a month.
Yeah.
A month. But I love the new approach that they take. Did you notice it's different?
It's a little streamlined, I think.
Yeah.
And I like that.
Yeah.
You know, for a long time they had a formula and they followed it, and it was the same thing every week. And that's okay because it was a working formula. They've streamlined it a little bit, and I really like it. And Steve DeShavi now has a goatee.
I know. Did you notice how short he is?
I think he's short. Yeah.
Yeah, he is, because he was standing. I watched one episode last night. Tampa, Florida, a hotel in Tampa, Florida, and he's standing next to this woman, and she looked like, she was 6'5" next to him, and I sort of giggled. I said, I didn't realize how short that man is. But
I follow him like on Twitter or something like that. One of them, and I do like him a lot. He was somebody that was on the scene during the 9/11 attack.
Mm-hmm.
He was on the ground there and actually has had health issues because of breathing and all that nasty stuff. So hats off to him for that. Yep. The goatee looks great, and his girlfriend is very pretty. So I'll just
I don't know who his girlfriend is, but now I got to check him out.
Okay, she's smoking hot.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
So we have been immersed even more in the paranormal world. Lots of stuff going on, and but I have to tell this quick story about what happened to me, because you thought it was absolutely hilarious.
Oh God, is this the thing on the microphone story?
The stink bug. I hate stink bugs. Okay. I know that they don't really do anything to
except
you.
Stink.
Only if you try to squish them or kill them. They don't stink otherwise. They just kind of annoy you. And they're everywhere this time of year. And I hate them because they make these horrible sounds when they fly around, and then they thump when they land on something. It literally is a thump, and it's creepy, and I hate it.
Now, it's winter, so it's odd that you have stink bugs around, which means that they're living in your house sometimes.
Yeah, they come inside. They come inside in the wintertime to get warm. I hate it because everybody has them. We all have them, but they're annoying, and I hate them. It's sort of like mice. Like, I don't really want to kill stink bugs. I don't want to kill mice. And every once in a while, we have 2 cats, and we used to have 3. And every once in a while, they would bring a mouse up from the basement. Now, they're just tiny little field mice. I don't want them to die. Do not want them to die. So I make Dave put them outside all the time. And everybody's like, well, they're going to come back in. I said, I know, but at least they're not going to die. So, but the problem is that when they're in the house and they're near me, I scream bloody murder. It's like a movie. I scream. I can't help it. It's just a trigger reaction. I scream. This is the same reaction with stink bugs.
So what you're telling me is it's a little bit like this.
Basically, that's what it sounds like. Now, Dave, after all these years, Dave and I have been together like 19 years, almost 19 years. He understands what's going on. He immediately goes to get the box and the broom when there's a mouse in the house, and he tries to corner it so that we can put it outside. He just hears my scream and knows what to do. I'm the same way with stink bugs.
Your husband is probably the most sainted human on earth right now.
He truly is. He truly is. You know me well enough to know that he really is. He puts up with a lot. He puts up with a lot. We'll leave it at that. So yesterday, I'm going to go on air for my Smooth 70s shift. And I talk a little bit, and I happen to look out of the corner of my eye at the microphone, and sitting on the little black cover on the microphone, what do they call that? The shield?
They call it a mic condom, or a muff.
Condom.
Muff, yep.
A muff. So I go to look at it out of the corner of my eye, and there is a what?
Nothing. I said, nice muff.
Thanks. I take good care of it. So listen, so I go and I look, and there's a stink bug on the mic, like right where my mouth has been. Like literally we were half an inch from each other. So I scream bloody murder. Spike, my dog, jumps out of his bed and doesn't know what the heck is going on. And it just creeped me out so much. You were hysterical because I told you about it. And you can't kill them because
They'll
they'll
stink,
stink.
and then others will come.
Right. So what
Yeah.
I do is I find a little bag and I put it in a bag and then I roll it up so hopefully they'll suffocate.
So here's what you do. Okay. First of all, I don't like bugs, spiders especially. If I
Spiders are
saw,
bad.
what's that? Yeah.
I'm okay with bugs. I can't take spiders.
You just flick them. You take your finger, your middle finger and your thumb, and you flick them across the room, and then you never see them again.
What, bugs?
Yes.
Bugs,
Just
you
flick it.
cannot flick these things though. They have little claws that dig into stuff. You can't flick a stink bug.
And
You
that's the
cannot
name of
flick
your
them.
next book.
It's truly so. That was my adventure yesterday. It's always something. How about the day that Spike tried to eat a stink bug?
Yeah, don't let that happen.
No, well, I didn't know he was, but he didn't like it very much, so he didn't try that again. So anyways, all right, so let's do Twisted Towns. I'm so excited about this.
All right, this is our first one, so we really don't know what we're doing yet. I know that we know where we're talking about and what we're talking about, but we haven't really thought much about like the presentation of it. So give us a little room on this, and we hope to do these every once in a while because I've got a town that I want to talk about soon as well. But
I'm very excited to do your town too because I think these are really neat.
Your town is your town, right?
My town is my town. Now, I didn't live there my entire life. I lived in central New York around I live just outside of Utica now, but it is basically my town, my city, Utica, New York. And most people who live in their own city or their own town, not everybody has positive things to say about their town anyways, but for the most part, I would say that Utica is a great city. It's had its ebbs and flows. It's gone up and down over the years. When I was in college, I took a couple of history classes on Utica in the 1800s, the 1900s. They were very, very interesting. And so I thought, I don't know how it came up, but I remembered that Utica was actually at one point a huge area in New York State for the mafia. And I remember my mother talking about Turk Zogby, who is he is a relative of mine on my mother's side of the family. We are Zogbys. And so I thought, well, why not look into this for Twisted Towns? Because there is a lot of history here that people may not know. I didn't know that the mafia was still that prevalent in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Because when you think of the mafia, the mob, you think about Chicago in the 20s and 30s. And you don't think about small town America being a hub in a state for the mafia, especially when I'm growing up.
Well, especially Utica. I mean, nothing against the town, but it's not a New York. It's not a Chicago. It's not a Miami or anything like that. It's Utica.
Utica, the city of Utica is a mid-sized city. So the population, I looked this up because I thought it would be interesting. The population as of 2018 was about 60,000 people. So not a huge city.
Right.
Smaller than Syracuse. Syracuse is much bigger. It was incorporated in February of 1832. So not the oldest town in New York State by any means, but certainly not one of the newer ones. We're also smack dab in the center of New York State. We're about 90 minutes west of our state capital of Albany and about 45 minutes east of Syracuse. So if anybody asks me where I'm from, I usually say we're right dead center or very close to dead center of the state of New York. So it has a big history. I talk about this all the time with you. Big history with Native Americans. The Native Americans, the Mohawk Nation of the Iroquois Confederacy originally inhabited New York State. So all across New York State, where we used to call it SCOOM when we were in school, because that's how we would learn the different tribes of the Mohawk Nation. Seneca, Cayuga, Huron, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk. Those were the different tribes that were found in New York State.
Okay.
So very rich in history here in New York. I know this is a totally different show completely, but the entire area, the entire land of New York State is very haunted, very rich in haunting. There's energy there, and you can go anywhere in New York State and someone will tell you a ghost story. It's just the way it is. There's so much history. And again, so much mob action. I didn't even realize until
why is that? I mean, like, why does the mob go, okay, we're going to spin the wheel and wherever it lands, that's the town we're going to take over?
I think a lot of it had to do with the location of the city. Think about it. You've got your huge mafia mob action down in New York City. You've got Albany, you've got Buffalo. We're sort of that perfect place to be the go-between, be sort of the hub. You know how American Airlines flies through O'Hare? That's their hub.
Yeah.
We were sort of the hub for all of these different mafia families. And there were offshoots of all of the different families. And so from like 1970 to 1992, there was a lot of stuff going on here. There were murders. We'll get into more of the famous stuff in just a little bit, but there was a lot going on here. Salvatore and Joseph Falcone, they led organized crime in Utica during that time period. That family itself went back to the 1930s. So it really started years and years and years ago, but hit its peak, I guess you could say, in the 70s, 80s. Finally, in the early 90s, they got taken down pretty big time with a huge federal lawsuit, trial, everything. And so, but that was the big peak of everything. The Falcones were a part of the Buffalo Magadino family. Also,
well, of course they were. I mean, when you think of Falcone, you think of Falgadigo or whatever the hell you just said, don't you? I mean, and what was
all these Italian names? Now, nothing against Italian people. I love Italian.
What's your family? The Zogbies or something?
We're Lebanese, which was really funny to me that we would have like this big time Utica gangster in my Lebanese family, but we're very, you know what?
But you're progressive Lebanese, yes, very progressive.
But if you think about it, the Greeks, the Italians, the Lebanese, the Syrians, they're very, geographically, they were very close. And, you know, the same kind of traditions, same kind of ideas. When I talk to somebody who's Italian and we compare stories, they're usually pretty similar, you know?
Yeah, usually the only difference is one has pasta sauce and the other one has whatever the hell Lebanese people eat.
Have you ever had Lebanese food?
I don't think so.
Oh my God.
No, wait. Shawarma is Lebanese, right?
Yes. Oh my, that's my favorite.
I love Lebanese food.
Labneh and oh my God. It's so good. It's so good. You poor boy. I may have to like Grubhub you some.
Wait a minute. What did you say? Grubhub?
Grubhub you some.
Okay, I thought you said Rubhub, and I'm thinking, no,
I'm gonna Rubhub you some. That's a whole different show.
No.
That's a different channel, different show.
Yeah, with the lights down low. Yes, okay.
So anyway, so they were part of the Magadino family in Buffalo. They were also known as the Arm. I thought that was cool. The Utica crew was about 15 to 20 members strong. So it was a pretty decent size for a city of, 50, 60,000 population. Salvatore Falcone was born in 1891 in Sicily. He lived in Utica until 1946 when he moved to Miami, and he was worth anywhere from $1 to $5 million. He traveled to Italy very often. He made a large money contribution there, and he was publicly honored by the one and only Benito Mussolini.
Oh, of course, Benito.
Of course he was. Now, Joseph Falcone was born in 1902 in Sicily as well. He originally settled in Brooklyn, and in 1925, he moved to Utica. He had a modest home, was married, had 3 kids. He was a short guy, liked to smoke cigars. I actually found his house. And guess what?
What?
Two things. Guess what? The house is right down the street from where my father lives now. And it's blocked out too.
Oh, really?
So
like on
Google
Maps?
Earth. Yes.
Wow.
Yes. I'll send you the picture. I'm going to put it up in our podcast too, on the YouTube video of our podcast, because it's pretty cool to see. Yeah, I thought that was really neat. And I just looked it up the other day and I thought, oh, you're kidding me. And what did we say about the Amityville house that the neighbors didn't like?
There was something about like Google blocks stuff out. I don't know. There's all sorts of stories about why they do it, but probably because a lot of people, it's kind of a tourist attraction probably there in Utica.
Probably.
Yeah.
Tourist attraction. That just makes me laugh because I know the city. But I thought that was also funny that it was right down the street from my dad. Right on Mohawk Street. I'll put it up in the show notes.
Okay. Can I put up a map too so that we can actually see where the
Yeah,
house
I'm
is?
gonna put up a map so everybody can see. It's pretty, I don't know. I love finding this stuff out because you know that I'm a huge local, regional American history fan. I was
Yep.
never huge on European history, Asian history, although I took classes in college, but I love local. I just don't feel like people realize or understand, maybe they take for granted the history that they're literally walking on, that their
Right.
feet are standing on right now.
Yeah.
History, there's not enough of an appreciation sometimes, I think, for that. So getting back to the mob, the family that the two brothers led in Utica was involved in things like bootlegging, alcohol, counterfeiting in the 1920s, bookmaking, floating dice, and card games. So, in other words, floating card and dice games would be they kind of just go around and set them up wherever for money. And extortion, strong arm tactics, organized thefts and robberies, receiving fencing of stolen goods, labor racketeering. So they did the whole 9 yards here in Utica. They're even suspected of international narcotics trafficking.
Well, I mean, think about this. I mean, I think their tagline on all their commercials was "for all your mobster needs." I think is what they used because they were involved.
We're
with
your
all
one-stop shop.
Your one-stop shop for all your mobster needs. Call today.
That's a big cliche in the radio world.
Call Mobster 245.
How many times have you got a client in that says, I'd like to put for all of your so-so needs, or we're your one-stop shop. If they'd all sound exactly the same every single day. So here's the timeline of the 70s and the 80s in Utica. And it's kind of fascinating how interwoven everything is. Now, this is where we get into death, murder, jail, the whole 9 yards. Salvatore Falcone died in 1972. So he died early on in this era of the mafia in Utica. But right up until his death, he was heavily involved in both Utica, New York, and the Miami mob scene. So he was double duty.
For all your mobster needs.
Exactly.
In the tri-state area.
Well, and I'm sure it was. And in so we're about 4 hours, depending on how fast you drive. If it's me, I can get there in 3 hours. We're about 4.5 hours from New York City. Such an easy route. With it to this day, they catch people on the thruway, the New York State Thruway, all the time, running drugs. You can go north up 87 to Albany, the thruway west right to Buffalo. I mean, they catch them all the time. So it was an easy route in between everything to be able to run drugs and do all of this stuff. In 1974, the Buffalo boss, Stefano Megadino, he died. So Joseph Falcone, who was getting old himself, he was the younger brother, but he was getting old too. He kind of assigned a mobster named Armine Persico. And he kind of took over a little bit, and he ordered members of the Colombo family to move into the area. Now we've got another family in Utica. In the meantime,
any relation to the famed TV investigator Colombo?
Probably not. I don't know where they got that name. I should look that up.
I don't know. I was just being silly.
I know you were, but now I'm kind of curious as to where. I mean, it's got to be somebody's name, obviously.
Just one more thing, ma'am. I'm going to chew on my cigar.
We used to watch that show.
I love him. He's great.
I know. We're always talking about these shows. I love bringing back these memories.
I love that you could never tell if he was looking at you or at the person across the street because of that eyeball.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Those, they don't make shows like those kinds of shows anymore.
Don't even get me started.
I don't even watch much regular TV anymore. I watch my ghosty shows, my documentaries. That's what I watch these days. I like shows about the wars, not the technical things, but the stories behind the wars and the Holocaust. I watch stuff about that all the time because it's really interesting to me. But anyways, so in the meantime, Tony Falange, which I know that name.
Falange,
a top lieutenant in the Falcone family, begins making moves, and he starts showing disrespect to Falcone himself. It is funny that I know a lot of these names because a lot of these names are still in the city of Utica now. I grew up with these names. So it's kind of neat to be able to talk about this because I know some of these, these names. By 1976, September of 1976, things start to get shaken up even more because a man named Albert, they called him Crazy Al Marone, was released from prison after he used violence to collect on a loan. He immediately began making threats against everyone and expressed his intention to take over Utica's rackets. Marone had a history of violence. He'd been implicated in 2 murders in the early 70s, but never brought to justice for them. But they are pretty sure that Marone was behind the murders. And it's weird because, stereotypical mobsters, they don't have to kill them themselves. They just tell somebody in their family, hey, go kill this guy. And we'll see about that later. But they'll say, hey, go kill this guy. And they do.
Well,
they don't
back
even
in those
think about
days,
it.
they would go to the yellow pages and they'd look for the ads that would say for all your mob killing needs. And then they would go to those people.
And there they were. It was all over the place, sort of like the Chaos Magician,
That's right.
Pages.
There, yeah.
Exactly. So then it starts to really get crazy. So here's where I'm going to start talking about a local attorney named Louis T. Brindisi. Brindisi is an interesting character because of his affiliations with the local mobsters. Brindisi, for many, many years, was he was basically their attorney. He was their defense attorney in all of their cases. And so that was both a good thing and a bad thing because when he defended one mobster, the other one would get angry and vice versa. So there was always kind of inner turmoil in the mafia, the Utica mafia scene, just because of Louis Brindisi at that time.
It's surprising, like he wasn't knocked off,
He is still alive and kicking. He still owns his law firm.
Let's go.
Still owns his law firm. I'm not kidding.
So is that in his ad? I was a mobster lawyer back in the.
He supposedly is not doing, got done with that. And, but well, I'll tell you about a little bit more about that in a little bit.
Okay.
So in October of 1976, Brindisi and his wife were having dinner with Crazy Al Marone and Marone's girlfriend. Brindisi excused himself and Marone got really nervous for some reason. He felt kind of odd. Then on their way home, Marone and his girlfriend were shot at and Marone was killed. Marone was killed apparently because he tried to shield his girlfriend from the bullets. She survived. Marone got shot. That's the story. But to this day, nobody knows who did it. There are a couple of suspects. Donato, or they called him Danny Nappy, and Jake Minicone are 2 of the suspects. These 2 are probably most likely the shooters. They were working for the Colombo mob family at the time, warring mob families, and that's how it works. And what the big deal was about having somebody alive, why it was so easy to kill people, I don't know. That's something I don't ever want to understand.
But back then, I mean, when you talk mobsters and stuff like that, a lot of times the police departments were paid off to keep their mouth shut and not, there was a lot of that going on.
I have one of those in my family.
What is your breeding? What is going on with your family? No wonder you're so freaking weird.
Very funny. I didn't know this until a couple of weeks ago when I told my mother we were going to do a Twisted Towns on Utica. And I asked her about Turk Zogby. And then she says, oh, yeah, so-and-so. I'll look it up in a second and let you know about it. So-and-so was a police detective and he knew all about it. And he, it stayed in the family and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my God, Mom, I didn't know all this stuff. So I'll have to tell you that story too when we get done, because it's kind of, my mother's one of those people that she doesn't think about things until, like, she'll just say them, and then she
Right.
doesn't realize what they mean. She doesn't realize how important it is and how crazy it is. She just says it.
Well, I think too, like I don't think enough people sit down with their parents and grandparents and say, tell me your story, because I think we'd all have much wider eyes and amazement at what these folks lived in their lives. And we just take for granted that we know them from, the minute that we can recognize them as our parent or our grandparent till they pass away. And that's all we know of them. We don't know everything that happened prior to that. So,
No, and
it was kind of funny because this week was the anniversary of my mom's passing.
yes.
And right before she passed away, she had a lot of family come. And that's when I learned that my mom raised a lot of her cousins. Her cousins were much younger than her, and my mom would raise them so that the parents, her brothers and sisters, could go off and make money for the family. So my mom was a child, a very young person, and raising all these kids. So like all of a sudden my mom passes away, and all of a sudden there's all these stories. So like this is a prime example of, like, you didn't know this about your family. People need to reach out to their loved ones and say, tell me your story. I think they'd be blown away by what they don't know.
And that's such a super point, because my grandparents, I don't have my grandparents with me anymore, but they, for lack of a better term, they pretty much raised me a lot of my life. And people from that generation didn't talk much about their lives.
Right.
They just didn't. So for you to learn about their lives growing up and back in those days, you had to ask them. And one thing that bothers me is that they passed when I was young enough that I didn't know enough to ask the questions that I should have asked.
Right.
If I had them back with me today, there are so many things I would ask them. My grandfather grew up in Utica. His father had a vegetable cart, a horse-drawn fruit and vegetable cart that they would take up and down the streets of Utica, and he helped him out. That's one thing that I was so happy that he shared with me. I didn't know enough to ask those questions. And if anybody's listening, any of our listeners, go to the people in your life and ask them about their lives. And I bet they would love to tell you stories, but that generation just never told stories like that.
Well, I think that, and also it was their life, and it wasn't
Right.
that different from everybody else that they knew at the time. Just
Right.
like our lives aren't that different from everybody we know. So who are we going to tell about our younger years? Not a lot of people. And I mean, we could do another segment called, family, whatever, and tell stories about, how grandpa had a car that had skis on the front to get through the snow and
Right.
delivered mail and shit like that. And I mean, everybody needs to do that. So I didn't mean to step into your story about
No.
Utica and all that kind of stuff, but like all your family connection to the mob. If I would have known that when you
fascinating.
reached out to me, there's no way you and I'd still be talking.
Whatever. You would have been
I'm
out
lucky
here
there's not
visiting
I'm
already.
lucky there's not a hit out on me someplace in the Utica market. There's
That's all gone now. But
the Zogby family's out there looking for Todd Michaels,
You know
and I've
what?
got a freaking cross here on my forehead right now.
just from me. This conversation gave me time to look up my conversation with my mother.
Okay.
So I asked her, I said, do you know anything about Turk Zogby? Because my mother knew Turk. And she says, he was a real gangster in Utica, prison many times, friends with cops, was really a nice guy, believe it or not. Sopranos type, LOL. And I said, Todd and I are starting a podcast. We're going to talk about it. Is he like a cousin of mine? She says, yes, a third cousin. So Turk Zogby, which I'll be talking about Turk shortly. He was a third cousin. I go, is he dead? And she says, don't think so. Your brother Barry did his roof, but not sure when. So I don't know if he's alive or dead. I don't want to know.
There's another thing. I would not do Turk Zogby's roof, because if you fuck it up, this guy's coming after you.
Yeah, but he's probably like 95 now.
Doesn't matter.
95.
They go in the yellow pages and they find the mobster hits. And
I'm telling you, this man, wait until you hear some of the things. He's been involved in murders and everything. So his real name was Jack, by the way, Jack Zogby. So my mother goes on to tell me the story. She says, when I was about 16, I was dating Johnny Morocco.
Of course she was.
A wannabe gangster. And somehow Turk found out and got to him and told him to stay away from me. And he did, LOL. So then I said, and she goes, and Turk's buddy in crime was Paul Zogby, the cop. He was on patrol and saw me standing with my friends on the busy corner. That's right on Genesee Street in Utica, what they used to call the busy corner. The streets came together.
Is that euphemism though for working the street corner?
No.
Okay, just wondering.
No.
I'm just thinking about
my
your
mother
family
was
history.
Pretty wild. My mother was pretty wild then.
I'm just thinking about your family history. It could be. You don't know.
So maybe they were talking.
Ask that question.
I know, you might as well. No, she was talking to some guys. She says he got out of his patrol car and put me on the bus. So that was Paul Zogby, the cop. So see, there was a lot of police interaction.
See, now I listen to that story and I hear her and her friends, quote unquote, on the corner, quote unquote, talking to her friend. And then a cop comes along and she gets shipped off on a bus. I mean, there's a lot there. You could read a lot into that.
There are many interpretations to that. She's gonna love you when she hears this one.
That's fine.
So my mother had a few of her own stories to tell about this, and what better person to ask? Because I was born in 71, so my mom was like 21 when I was born. So she's just old enough that she was right in the middle of everything going on in the city. So I just thought that was really funny. My mother had her own stories to add to the whole thing, and she knew Turk. And I've never met. You know what? I'm not going to say I've never met Turk, because when I was a child, I probably at some point was in a room with Turk.
Get him on the phone. Let's talk to him.
Wouldn't that be great if I could get him on the phone?
Yes. What are you talking about? Beep, boop, beep, beep, beep.
You know what? I'm going to have to track him down. Wouldn't it be hilarious? If he's alive, my mother doesn't know.
Listen, I don't know if it would be hilarious because he might, talking to a guy about his mobster days may not be the best thing for a girl in Utica to do.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm family, so he probably would. I'm not kidding. He probably would. Because you figure he's got to be like 90 if he's alive. I'm going to be 50. I mean,
here's another thought for you. I mean, maybe he's got some mobster money set aside, play up to that, and then when he passes away, you get it. You know what I'm saying?
You never know. I should cozy up to the mobster.
Hell yes.
You never know. I'm telling you. So,
if your husband ever pisses you off, you can give him a call and have him knocked off.
I don't think there's much left in Utica except, like just regular crime, as sad as that is to say. But, so nobody knows who killed Marone at this point, but those were the two big suspects. There's also another suspect. He was a lieutenant. I find it very interesting that the families had ranks. A lieutenant, the Flange lieutenant named Angelo Conti, I know that name too, who was reported to have wanted Marone dead. So there's a few. The idea is that Nappy and Minicone shot him without permission, showing disrespect, which sets the scene for this long and drawn out bloody mob war for the Utica, New York rackets. That kind of kicked it off. That kicked the whole thing off, made things, dialed it up 10 notches. And so over the next handful of years, there were people getting killed left and right in Utica. There was a mobster's wife who got killed. Her name was Dawn Grillo. I'm sure lots of people remember that story. She was skimming money off of one family and possibly cooperating with the authorities. Not all mob wives were, these innocent little women. A lot of these mob wives were in it just as much as the men.
Right.
So her murder was interesting. She was strangled and her body was dropped into a ravine not too far from Utica. And I know exactly where it was dropped. And when her body got stuck on a ledge, this is so gross. When her body got stuck on a ledge, one of them climbed down, struck her in the head with a rock to make sure she was dead. And then he threw her the rest of the way down.
Ow.
And they don't care. That to them was another day at the office. So they're attributing it to mobster Dominic Breddy. He was one of another crew in Utica at the time. And after they killed Don, they went drinking at a local Italian restaurant with none other than, I hear, Louis T. Brindisi, the lawyer. So they were all very cozy in the 70s. The 70s were big. It was when it started to really, really ramp up. Everything kept going on and on and on for the next several years. In 1983, January of 1983, a big thing happens. a thing, Todd. Remember the lawyer, Louis Brindisi? Well, Joe DeQuino, who was a young criminal defense attorney, happened to be working for Brindisi. He was shot to death inside the office. Now, I was 12 at the time, and I do remember this was huge news because Brindisi was well known as working for the mob in Utica. And to find out that one of his young lawyers was murdered in his office was huge, just absolutely huge news. It was all over the place. DeQuino was 26, I think. He was pretty young. For 2 years, they couldn't figure out who did it. They figured it was either a case of mistaken identity because they thought that maybe they actually thought it was Brindisi himself and they killed him.
Right.
Or because he was a prodigy of Brindisi's, and Brindisi was a well-known mob mouthpiece, this was kind of a macabre message to send to his mentor. You know, we can get to anybody, including your prodigy. So it turned out that they believe, or so they say, they believe it was some drug addict who had been trying to get in touch with Brindisi but couldn't because Brindisi's wife was dying of cancer at the time. By the time they figured it all out, the guy had already been killed by someone and burned in a car, which was kind of convenient, I think. Then again, that's what they say happened. We're never going to know for sure what really happened. Maybe Brindisi knows, but obviously he's not speaking about it at all and never will. That's when a lot of big stuff was going on in the mob world in Utica. It was starting to come to a head in probably the early to mid 80s. There were actually a whole bunch more murders that year in Utica, 1983, that were mob related, including Angelo Grillo, Don Grillo's hubby. He finally bit the big one and got murdered a few years after her death. Towards the end of the 80s, organized crime in Utica started to wind down, mostly because they all had big mouths and they wanted everyone to know how tough they were, so they kept getting caught. They couldn't keep their dealings to themselves because in the mafia world, I guess, the more you brag about the horrible things you do, the bigger the man you are, the bigger the family you are, the more power you have. So it was a different kind of mobster, I think, in the 80s. I think I watched shows about Chicago mobsters in the 30s, the 20s and 30s, and everything there was very quietly done. Even the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, they just come in, they shoot, they leave. And it was a little bit more difficult back then, I think, to put the blame on somebody. In the 70s and 80s, they sort of got full of themselves and they liked to brag about it, which ultimately, led to their demise.
Yeah. So I want to talk to your mom because I've got a couple of questions. I want to talk to her at some point about the whole prostitute thing, but also I want to ask her as the mother of a child living in Utica in the 70s and 80s, why the hell she didn't move really far away when there's bodies being shot and burned cars and dead bodies and ashes and she's, she part of the family is the mob. Why do you keep your young child in Utica? I want to ask her that.
That's a great question. It happens a lot. I think it happened a lot because part of it was probably because she was part of the family.
So then let's dig into that. Like, was she involved in anything at this point?
No, I don't think so.
How do you know?
I can't see my mother doing it. Anything. My mother didn't do anything. I don't think she was that close. Like she wasn't. There's two kind of families. There's the Zogby family, and then there's the mafia family. She wasn't part of the mafia family.
Well, but she knew the mafia family. She knew some of the stories. They were looking out for her, throwing her on a bus and shit.
I know. We should get her. Oh, that would be hilarious. We should really get her.
And we could call the segment Mobster Mom. And then we talk to her. Yeah.
We should do a segment called Mobster Moms, and we could get mobsters' moms on to talk about it.
Right. And then we do get murdered. What are you thinking about?
That's great. I can't believe it. So anyways, just a couple of big notes. So Jack Zogby is apparently my third cousin. I didn't realize he was my third cousin until I talked to my mom. We will get her on. Everybody called him Turk. He was involved in the big federal case of 1990. There was a huge federal racketeering case that pretty much decimated what was left of organized crime in much of our region, including Utica. So right around 1990, 1992, that's when it all kind of came down. They really were in, because of their big mouths, they were able to really pin a lot on them. So they kind of got rid of the mob scene. And I'm sure there's still some stuff going on, but not anywhere near the organized crime that there was years ago. If anything, it's just regular crime, like I said. The 1990 case was interesting because it brought down Minna Cone, Anthony and Sarah, Turk Zogby, Betty Carcone, his son Russell Carcone. They were each found guilty of operating a criminal enterprise in Utica, including illegal gambling and extortion, transporting stolen property, the murder of Marone, and a bomb attack on Thomas Breddy. And I didn't write it down, but there was a huge murder case involving Turk. Turk is actually in jail for many, 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 many years, off and on over the years. Probably as many years as, me total, as me being alive. Total.
Good Lord.
Yeah. So it was crazy there. And I'm just fascinated by the psychology of it, that they could just it's like going to work at the office. They just go and kill people.
But again, there were police involved. There were city officials involved, and they were involved primarily because they were afraid of their own lives and their families' lives and all that kind of stuff. There was all that kind of stuff going on.
And greed. They were getting paid handsomely for what they were doing, for
absolutely
their backs and allowing it to continue. Like my mom said, Paul Zogby the cop was crooked. I asked her if I could talk about this, and she said yes. So you can blame it on my mother.
Listen, any letters or any death threats can be directed straight at Sandy. Nothing to do with this side of the podcast at all. Okay.
I'll give everybody Todd's address will be in the show notes.
Sally Zogby, we'll call you now.
we could do the witness protection program. We could have new names. We call each other other names anyways. Some of the weird conversations we have. And the other big note is about Louis Brindisi. He has a son named Anthony. Now, Louis, as far as we know, gave up any connections to the mafia, the mob, back when it went down. So he hasn't been involved in any of that in years. His son, Anthony, is a great guy. I know him personally, and he's a really wonderful guy. He just happens to be, and he's in no way affiliated with the mob or any illegal activity, but he just happens to be a state congressman.
Oh, imagine that.
He works down in Washington, and there's a big controversy going on right now because they are still counting the votes from the election on November 3rd between him and the Republican former congresswoman who decided to rerun. And at one point, I think there were 4 votes separating them. So this has been drawn out in court for months now.
So what is he waiting for? He just needs to make the phone call and all that goes away and he's in charge.
Yeah, I don't think there's a phone call to make at this point.
I'm sure there is. Sure there is.
I will tell you, Anthony is a really upstanding guy, and there's always going to be accusations by the other party, so to speak. And
anyone feel like
people,
maybe Sandy's been paid to say that?
No, I actually love him. I'll have to put up a picture. Yes. I'll have to put up a couple of pictures I have of me with Anthony. He's a very nice man, and he's on the up and up. So there.
Yes.
So that's the mob world in Utica. The first installment of our Twisted Towns, and a lot of this stuff I just had no idea about. So pretty interesting stuff.
I'm just gonna. Here's the statement of the show. One line, and I say it with all the love in the world. Your family's fucked up. And
I know. Where do we start? This isn't even the tip of the iceberg. But yeah, so it's kind of neat. It's very interesting because you know that a lot of this stuff, most of them are dead and gone. And I know a lot of the names. I know a lot of the names that are still around, and I'm sure they're relatives, and it's just an interesting thing to know about, to know that it's about your town, that there's a lot going on.
Right. Well, not only your town, but your family.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know we were that involved in it. I knew the name Turk
Jeez.
Zogby, but I didn't realize how involved until I started doing research. And I think that the moral of the story, the moral of this episode is do your research. It's so interesting. Find out about where you come from and what puzzle pieces went together before you were even born to bring you into the world that you're in now.
Right.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah, get as much information as you can about mom's dealings in the mob so that you know what her mob name was and what her ranking was in the field. And
Todd, we're gonna get my mom on.
I'm not letting up on her. I know deep down inside, I feel it. Your mom was part of the mob.
We'll have to ask her what
she
her
was
mob
like Mama
name
Zogby or something like that. She had a mob name, and nobody pissed her off because she'd make the meal, and then somebody would die because they ate the poison shit. You know, there's some backstory
if anything,
there.
She was just trying to get cigarettes. See?
Possibly.
Try to get it,
hey, give me a cigarette. Mama Zogby needs a cigarette.
That sounds reminds me of Large Marge. Remember Large Marge?
No, but she was part of the mob too. She was a prostitute for 5 men at a time. That's why they called her Large.
So we'll get her on here because she'll be a trip, and you can ask her all those questions.
As long as she doesn't get offended by what I'll say.
She won't. Okay. She'll have a ball with it. She'll have fun. Right. She'll love it. She when I was doing mornings on the air, my previous job before Smooth 70s, she had a segment on my morning show. She was NASCAR Nana. Mm-hmm. She loved it. So she'll love it. She'll enjoy it. So do you have any idea what next week's episode will be?
Oh, is that's on my shoulders?
That's your choice. That's your choice next week.
You know what I want to talk about next week?
What?
I want to talk about for us what constitutes decent evidence in an investigation.
That's a great question.
Personally.
Yeah.
Because for everybody it's different, and what you may think is, slam dunk evidence, I may not agree with. And I want to kind of talk about that a little bit, and then talk about some of the stuff that we've gotten. And if we have some samples of what we've gotten, it would be cool to kind of incorporate those.
I would love to. I've got tons of stuff that we can talk about. I have some evidence that we can play for everybody.
And large Marge will come on the program later on.
We should get my mom on real quick.
You got $50? I can make you a good time.
You know what? Maybe we'll get my mom on real quick for like 10 minutes and harass her. And then we'll do our full-on episode. But I think that's a good idea. That's really a good idea.
Thank you. And guess what? I just came up with that off the top of my head because I had nothing planned.
Because I only said to you like 4 or 5 days ago, Todd, you pick what we're talking about next week.
I am so busy with creating and manifesting and getting shit done. I don't have time to worry about Large Marge and the stories of her being a raft on the Utica River, taking men across to save their lives from the mob. I can't do that research.
Okay, well, you're doing pretty well under pressure.
Is there a Utica
Utica? There's no
river?
Utica. There's the Mohawk River.
Well, that's what I meant. I meant the Mohawk River, of course.
And there's the Barge Canal.
Well, and she was the barge.
She was Large Barge Marge.
That's right.
So
when you see her floating in the water, you knew there were mobsters around.
All right, wrapping it up. Next week should be really interesting. Get all your evidence together, and we'll have a good conversation.
I'll wait till the last 5 minutes before we start.
Exactly. That's what I used to do in college, I did so well in college, and I wouldn't write term papers until like 1 day before they were due. I worked so well under pressure.
I hate school, so I never went.
Oh, I didn't like it. I did well, though. I didn't like it. But...
Hey, look at me. I'm so good. My family's from the mob, and I'm educated.
My family is from the mob. I think we'll leave it at that. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. As always, you can find us on YouTube, the Sandy and Toddcast. Be sure to check us out and subscribe to our Toddcast. Subscribe to our podcast and We have a great announcement. We will soon be up on Apple.
Yep.
And Spotify.
Yep.
And we'll make the announcement probably next week that we're ready and we're ready to go.
And soon it'll go to our Facebook page, all that kind of stuff. So if you follow us there, you'll know when new stuff comes out.
Follow us on our Facebook page, the Sandy and Toddcast. It doesn't get any easier than that. It's the name of our show everywhere. So.
All right.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.